In the early morning hours of October 13th, 2025, less than 24 hours after Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in Tucson, Arizona, federal cell tower data places a vehicle tied to this conspiracy less than 3 miles from a secondary border crossing into Mexico. That is not a detail that surfaces in a random missing persons case. That is a detail that surfaces when someone had a destination before the kidnapping ever happened. But when investigators arrested Robert Vance the following day at a roadside motel in Las Vegas, they looked at his odometer, saw nearly 400 miles of unexplained travel that did not align with a direct drive from Tucson to Nevada, and closed the file anyway. They called him a lone wolf. They called it an isolated, spontaneous crime of opportunity. And for 8 months, the public believed them. How do you miss 400 miles? What was on the other side of that border that someone needed to reach before Robert Vance was ever taken into custody? And why does the answer to both of those questions connect back to a document Nancy Guthrie spent 37 years protecting after her husband died? Because last week, investigative journalist Brian Entin obtained unsealed federal documents that revealed what forensic teams pulled out of the Mexican desert, and what they found inside that buried steel lockbox does not just contradict the lone wolf narrative. It reframes everything about why Nancy Guthrie was targeted in the first place. This was never a random crime. It was a calculated one, and we are going to follow every lead. Here is what the public record now confirms, and here is where the lone wolf story starts to fall apart. When Robert Vance was arrested at that Las Vegas motel on October 14, 2025, investigators processed his vehicle. His odometer showed nearly 400 miles of travel that did not match a direct Tucson to Nevada route. The highway patrol logged it. They assumed back roads. They moved on. That assumption cost 8 months, because a burner phone, funded by a 61-year-old woman named Coral Michelle Smith, living in Mesa, Arizona, pinged a cell tower less than 3 miles from a secondary border crossing into Mexico in the early morning hours of October 13th. That ping landed at the exact window the kidnapping was still in motion, and it landed at the exact moment an encrypted coordinate file was generated and transmitted to a desktop computer sitting in Smith's living room. Federal cyber units found that file during a forensic download of Smith's computer following her arrest in Mesa. It was stored inside a hidden, encrypted communication application. The metadata on the file confirmed it was received on October 14, 2025, 2 days after Nancy disappeared, and mere hours before Vance was caught in Nevada. Someone sent those coordinates while the operation was still running. What is strange about this, and we need to slow down here, is the timing. The coordinate file did not arrive before the crime. It arrived after Nancy was gone and before Vance was in custody. That is not preparation. That is coordination in real time. Someone was managing this while it was happening. When federal agents followed those coordinates to a patch of desert outside Nogales, Mexico, the ground above the lockbox looked like every other stretch of loose topsoil in every direction, undisturbed, unremarkable, indistinguishable from the earth around it, until the ground-penetrating radar flagged what was 4 feet underneath. The lockbox had been in the ground for months, sitting there in the dark, 4 feet under the Mexican desert, while Nancy Guthrie was still missing and the public was being told the case was closed. Investigators unearthed a heavy commercial-grade steel lockbox wrapped in waterproof surveillance tape. Its exterior showed significant weathering, months underground, matching the timeline of Nancy's abduction exactly. They did not open it at the dig site. They transported it under armed federal escort to a secure forensic laboratory in Phoenix. And when they opened it under sterile conditions, what was inside did not just connect Robert Vance to Coral Michelle Smith. It told investigators exactly what Nancy Guthrie was worth to whoever ordered this. But the lockbox is not the most devastating thing recovered from that desert excavation. Inside it, federal forensic technicians found something that tells you exactly how long someone had been planning this, and exactly how little Nancy Guthrie's 37 years of work meant to them. When forensic technicians opened the lockbox under sterile conditions in the Phoenix laboratory, the family trust paperwork inside was described in the initial lab report as pristine, unweathered, undamaged, perfectly preserved, despite months buried in desert earth. Because whoever placed it there had sealed it carefully before the box went into the ground. Inside that box sat a high-capacity digital storage drive, a stack of financial documents from an offshore banking institution in the Cayman Islands, and a pristine copy of the family trust Nancy Guthrie created the year her husband died. But there is a question the competitor transcript never asked loudly enough. Who sent the GPS coordinates to Smith's computer, and when exactly did that file arrive? The metadata answers the when. October 14th, 2025, after Nancy was gone, hours before Vance was caught. Someone transmitted those coordinates while the operation was still in motion, and that means coordination was still active after the kidnapping was complete. Now here is what the digital drive contained. Federal cyber units bypassed its encryption and found hundreds of scanned pages documenting the internal structure of the Guthrie family trust. Not just copies, legal drafts designed to systematically restructure the trust's primary beneficiaries, diverting multi-million-dollar real estate holdings away from Nancy's immediate family. Someone was not planning a ransom. They were planning a permanent transfer. 3 of those core legal documents had been digitally modified on October 10th, 2025, 2 days before the abduction. The electronic signature tracking certificate embedded in those altered PDFs links directly to a private encryption key registered under Coral Michelle Smith's personal email address. Her digital signature is on documents that restructured Nancy Guthrie's trust, before Nancy was ever taken. That detail should not matter, but it does, because Nancy Guthrie did not inherit that trust. She built it. Every filing, every renewal, every quiet legal update for 37 years after her husband died, she did alone. And the people who altered those documents, who buried a copy across a border, who treated it as a transaction instrument, they had to study it first. They had to know it. What they handled as paperwork was the thing she spent her entire widowhood protecting. But there is one item recovered from that lockbox that forensic teams could not immediately explain. Not the documents, not the drive, something smaller, something that initially made no sense, until prosecutors consulted a forensic medical analyst, and the answer made everything worse. Inside the lockbox sat a small sealed glass vial. Inside the vial, a biological sample. Expedited genetic analysis confirmed a direct DNA match for Nancy Guthrie, and this is where it gets complicated, because a DNA sample buried in a desert lockbox sounds like the most disturbing detail in this case, until you understand why it was there. This was not a trophy. According to forensic medical analysts consulted by prosecutors, certain offshore discretionary trusts require verified biological lineage samples to release funds to secondary beneficiaries. Someone preserved Nancy Guthrie's DNA to meet a foreign bank's paperwork requirements. Her biology was a line item. A pristine copy of a trust document, the one Nancy had updated just months before she disappeared, the one she had maintained through every quiet year since her husband died, was sitting inside a steel box 4 feet under foreign soil, while investigators in Tucson were telling the public the case was closed. Now here is what the physical evidence actually says about how this operation worked. A shared surveillance notebook recovered from Smith's Mesa residence contained 2 distinct handwriting samples. The section mapping Nancy's neighborhood security camera blind spots matched known samples of Robert Vance's handwriting. The section logging her mail delivery times and lawn care schedule matched Smith's penmanship. This was a shared document, passed between them. They built a portrait of Nancy's daily life together, on paper, over time. What the $12,000 in structured cash deposits made into Smith's bank account throughout summer 2025 cannot be explained by her pension alone, and we will get to where that money came from. But let us be honest about one thing we do not yet fully know: how the biological sample was collected, when, where, and under what circumstances, has not been disclosed in any public court filing reviewed. That is a question this investigation has not yet answered publicly. What do you think is at the end of that funding trail? Because Smith's pension cannot account for $12,000 in structured deposits, always just under the federal reporting threshold, always untraceable. If you were building this case, that source is the thread you pull first. Drop what you think in the comments. When you lay the full evidence chain flat, the cell tower ping at the border, the encrypted coordinates on Smith's computer, the altered trust documents carrying her digital signature, the lockbox buried across the international line, and the DNA sample preserved for offshore banking compliance, the picture that emerges is not complicated. Robert Vance executed the physical crime. Coral Michelle Smith provided the funding, the vehicle, the digital infrastructure, and her own signature on the paperwork that made the financial transfer possible. The lone wolf narrative collapsed the moment federal agents opened that lockbox in Phoenix. The conspiracy has two confirmed participants, physical evidence connecting both of them to the crime before it happened, and a federal prosecutor preparing a racketeering case that makes ignorance nearly impossible to argue. For the first time since October 12, 2025, the case has a shape, and that shape points directly at the people already in custody. The only problem is that neither Robert Vance nor Coral Michelle Smith had the means, the legal knowledge, or the financial infrastructure to build what federal investigators just finished excavating. Someone else designed this. And that person has not been named yet. But before we get to who, there is a login. One single unmasked moment in an otherwise perfectly anonymous digital trail. September 28, 2025, Chicago. And what that login connects to tells you exactly how long this was planned, and exactly who had the access to plan it. Before we get to Chicago, before we get to the shell company and the login, and the attorney whose name is about to enter this case for the first time, we need to come back to Nancy. In November 2024, Nancy Guthrie updated her estate plan, not because something was wrong, because she was careful. Because for 37 years she had been the person who made sure everything her husband left behind would land correctly. She was planning for her family's future. Someone else was planning for it too. Coral Michelle Smith was not a criminal by profile. She was a retired school district administrator who earned a pension. The question federal prosecutors are now answering is not who she was, it is what she was offered, and when she said yes. Now here is where the architecture of this conspiracy becomes visible. Every login into the encrypted communication network used multiple proxy servers, signals bouncing through Switzerland, through Panama, through layers designed to make the source untraceable. Every login except one. On September 28, 2025, a single unmasked moment occurred. One login that did not route through a proxy. Federal cyber units traced it to a commercial network provider in Chicago, Illinois. One day later, structured cash deposits began appearing in Coral Michelle Smith's bank account. The Chicago network footprint belongs to a shell company registered in Delaware, Apex Management Solutions. No physical offices, no public website, no listed employees. For 3 years, the account sat completely dormant. Then, in early August 2025, the same period Nancy Guthrie finalized her updated estate planning adjustments in Pima County, the account received a $40,000 wire transfer. The Apex Management Solutions listing in Delaware shows a registered statutory agent in downtown Wilmington, a standard commercial address used by hundreds of shell registrations on the same block, designed to look like a business and feel like nothing at all. From that $40,000, structured cash flowed downward, into Smith's account. From Smith to Vance. 3 layers of financial insulation between the architect and the crime. By the time Robert Vance drove south toward the Mexican border on October 13th, the person who funded that drive was separated from it by a Delaware shell company, a Chicago network provider, and months of carefully structured cash deposits. Nancy was the only person who had ever managed that trust, the only signature that had ever mattered on those documents, and someone spent months building a system designed to make her signature irrelevant. According to Dr. Eris Vaughn, former FBI behavioral analyst and structured criminal conspiracy specialist, criminal operations that target high-value estates, rarely rely on physical violence as a first resort. The physical actor is frequently used as a distraction to draw local law enforcement's attention away from the complex financial paperwork occurring simultaneously in the background. That is exactly what the evidence shows here. Vance was the distraction. The trust restructuring was the objective. Now here is the most damaging detail in this entire case. And it did not surface until federal investigators traced that Chicago broadband connection to a residential address in Lincoln Park. Property records for that specific connection show the home is currently owned by a 48-year-old corporate attorney. This individual previously represented a distant branch of the Guthrie family during a contested probate dispute in 1996. They had direct, legitimate access to the historical archived files of the Guthrie estate. They knew the trust's legal architecture, its vulnerabilities, its beneficiary structure, its offshore compliance requirements, because they had worked inside it nearly 30 years ago. This is the first time a direct, verifiable link has been established between the digital trail in Chicago and the actual history of the Guthrie family trust. Someone who was trusted with the legal history of this family used that access to design a system that treated Nancy Guthrie's life as an administrative obstacle. If that detail is sitting with you right now, subscribe to Casebreak Network, because we are not done following this lead, and when the federal indictment drops, we will be here. Breaking cases. Following every lead. Coral Michelle Smith is sitting in the Maricopa County Jail right now, and she has already told federal prosecutors she will give them a name. The grand jury convenes next Tuesday, and whatever she hands them in that room is either the end of this case or the beginning of something larger. We will find out which one right now. Smith has agreed to give prosecutors a name. The grand jury meets Tuesday. Do you think whoever she names will have a prior connection to the Guthrie family already in the public record? Or is this person still completely invisible? Drop what you think below, because this case is about to move. The Federal Forensic Laboratory in Phoenix, where that lockbox was opened, is a sterile, climate-controlled room, the kind of place where evidence is processed under fluorescent light with gloved hands and case numbers, where a family trust document created in grief becomes Exhibit A. Somewhere in Tucson, Nancy Guthrie's house is still standing. The mail still arrives, the lawn still grows, and the woman who managed everything inside it for 37 years is still missing. Robert Vance has been charged. Coral Michelle Smith is cooperating, and the individual in Chicago has not yet been formally indicted, which means, by every standard this system is built on, they are innocent until a federal grand jury says otherwise. The decision Nancy Guthrie made in November 2024, the one where she sat down and updated the trust she had protected alone for 37 years, the one she made because she was careful and because she loved her family, may be the thing that finally brings justice for Nancy Guthrie. Because that update is what activated this conspiracy, and that means every layer of it, the shell company, the buried lockbox, the altered documents, the DNA vial, traces back to a decision she made to protect the people she loved. The evidence does not start in a Las Vegas motel, or a Mesa driveway, or a Chicago law office. It starts with Nancy, and it ends with her too. Nancy sits at her kitchen table in Tucson. The trust documents are in front of her, the same ones she has reviewed every year since 1988, the same signatures, the same designations, updated carefully each time, because that is who she is. She has a pen. She knows exactly what she is looking at. She has done this alone for 37 years, and she will do it again, because the people she loves are counting on something she built, and she has never once let it slip. She never got to that table again. The federal grand jury convenes next Tuesday. When that indictment drops, when the name currently hidden behind a Delaware shell company and a Chicago broadband connection becomes part of the public record, Casebreak Network will be here. Subscribe now so you do not miss it, because we are breaking cases, and we are following every lead for Nancy. What was done to Nancy Guthrie was not a crime of impulse. Robert Vance did not choose her randomly. Coral Michelle Smith did not stumble into this. Someone studied the Guthrie family trust, the document Nancy had protected since the year her husband died, and decided it was worth more than she was. That is what the federal grand jury is being asked to confirm, and that is what Casebreak Network will be here to cover when they do. Nancy Guthrie spent 37 years making sure the people she loved would be protected after she was gone, and the people who studied that devotion decided to use it against her.